Yeah, so as far as my perspective on Trump goes, it tends to do with the view, it tends to revolve around the view that he is a businessman at heart and that the focus of his um, political style, I guess, is deal making. I wrote a lot in my book about Trump's mentor, Roy Cohn, who was, among other things, the general counsel to McCarthy during the McCarthy hearings. He was also, a New York City lawyer that represented a lot of unsavory figures, including some tied to organized crime, and also had the ear of Ronald Reagan and top politicians in the United States and sort of bridged a variety of worlds. And he very much essentially taught Trump the art of the deal, as it were. And, a lot of his Cohn's close associates, like the Pope family, for example, were very politically connected, also connected to organized crime, arguably, but were very much in the business of making backroom deals, and that's how, political power in the United States functions.
America doesn't run on democracy. It runs on backroom deals and favors exchanged among the powerful. That's the latest message from investigative journalist and author Whitney Webb. According to Webb, Trump operates less like a traditional politician and more like a businessman, with deal-making as his main political approach. His mentor, Roy Cohn, built power through secret negotiations, first as general counsel to Joseph McCarthy, then as a force in New York's political and legal circles. He surrounded himself with influential figures, including those with ties to organized crime, and operated in a world where elections mattered less than secret agreements. Trump learned from Cohn that loyalty is about control, not trust, and that power isn't given, but taken. Now, with this approach guiding his second term, millions of Americans will live with the consequences, while those in control continue making decisions behind closed doors. Make sure to stick around until the end of the video, as Whitney Webb shares her unfiltered thoughts on Donald Trump and the future of America. Also guys, if you want to stay ahead in the crypto world, I send out a free 5-minute daily newsletter covering expert predictions, on-chain data breakdowns, and breaking news. Click the first link in the description, enter your email, and join 50,000 plus others in becoming a smarter crypto investor today. Now, here's Whitney Webb with her latest outlook.
Fundamentally, I think a lot of what Trump likes to focus on and promote about his political style is around negotiations, whether those are diplomatic negotiations or negotiations with businessmen that lead to big number investments he can tout to the public, which is, I think part of the impetus behind his having the Project Stargate press conference, at the White House on his first full day. At his second term. And I think that's also kind of consistent with what we saw from Trump during his first term as well. So when you're sort of focused on those metrics, I don't necessarily think that the focus is necessarily on how do I help everyday Joe. I'm sure that, in his mind, I don't really necessarily want to speak for him, but if you're, of the opinion that I'm going to tout this big multi-million-dollar investment in U.S. AI infrastructure, for example, perhaps he views that as helpful for the American economy and thus helpful for the American people. And I think it is very likely that over the next 4 years, there certainly will be some Americans that economically benefit, from Trump's economic policy. But I don't necessarily think that's going to be everybody. And I think, generally, based on what we've seen so far, there's been a lot of courting of big tech executives and a lot of talk about making the U.S. the AI and crypto capital of the world. And how much of that is necessarily going to translate or trickle down to sort of refer to, Reaganite economic terms, to the everyday American public. It's really hard to know. But again, I just want to go back to someone like Eric Schmidt, for example, who, as I noted earlier, had sort of an outsized role in developing the AI policy of the military and intelligence community. He wrote a book called The Age of AI with Henry Kissinger, and also, I believe, a professor from MIT, who I'm sorry, his name escapes me at the moment, but basically, that book posited that essentially AI is going to make a two-tiered society. There's going to be the top tier of people who develop and maintain AI and set and determine what its objective functions are, and then sort of a second class who, which we would assume is larger, than the first class, so they don't explicitly say that, but who AI acts upon, and eventually that group will lose the ability to understand and really be able to conceive of how AI is impacting their lives, and will develop some sort of dependency on AI for things like decision making, sort of leading to this phenomena that they refer to in the book as cognitive diminishment, which I sort of see as this idea of, we've all heard it before, if you don't use it, you lose it. Sort of the idea of like mental math, you start using a calculator or a phone calculator or something like that, and it becomes more difficult over time, and eventually very difficult to be able to do mental math in your head, when perhaps when you were in grade school, it was much easier to do that because you had to use that ability regularly. And so they essentially argue that by not making those decisions and outsourcing that to AI, this particular class will lose the ability to make those decisions over time. And when you also factor in that there's a lot of effort to sort of outsource creativity, art and music, to artificial intelligence, will that have an impact on people's ability to create, and what sort of impact will this have on society? And, these are things that I think sort of get left out of the public discussion, and I don't think they're really on someone like Trump's radar as a businessman. He's focused on sort of the bottom line, the number, the success of the negotiation, and how successful it looks, frankly, whether it's to his base or to businessmen he wants to court, or, other people, foreign leaders,
While some may benefit from Trump's economic strategies, his priority seems to be winning over tech executives and pushing the US to dominate AI and crypto. Webb references Eric Schmidt's book, The Age of AI, co-authored with Henry Kissinger, which predicts AI will create a two-tiered society. A small elite will control and develop AI, while the majority will depend on it for decision-making, gradually losing the ability to think independently. She argues that Trump isn't paying attention to these long-term effects. His businessman mindset prioritizes numbers, how successful the deals look, and the approval of powerful allies, whether in corporate boardrooms or among foreign leaders. The broader societal impact of these deals remains an afterthought in his administration's agenda. Do you agree with her? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's return to Whitney Webb as she continues her discussion.
So how do you feel when you hear about AI creating this two-tier system?
Oh, I certainly don't think that's positive. I think it's sort of the technocratic model that we discussed earlier, where you sort of have an elite class that sort of set, the system that will micromanage the masses at the end of the day. I mean, they don't explicitly say that in the book, but if you're familiar with someone like Henry Kissinger, for example, and some of his more controversial views on the masses and the public, and some of his more infamous quotes, is that a system that he wants to happen? I don't really know. He's dead, and so no one can ask him. But I think it is kind of disturbing in a sense that someone
What are some of his more infamous quotes? I'm not super familiar with Kissinger. I know who he is, but I couldn't quote him.
Well, he created a national security memorandum, for example, that viewed people that live in the third world birth rates and in the global south as national security threats to the United States, and wanted to implement policies to reduce their population size, for example, and sort of had what I would argue was a eugenicist bent to some of his policies. And he was one of the mentors, of course, to people that have become infamous in recent years, like the World Economic Forum chairman Klaus Schwab. Some of his more infamous quotes that he's known for refer to, soldiers being, pawns of foreign policy, essentially sort of like, people's lives are just, pawns on a chessboard for the sort of the elite figures to move around, for their benefit. That's sort of the mentality as I see it of someone like him. But obviously he's been, praised as a model statesman and all of this stuff, and has mentored Trump in his first administration, mentored Hillary Clinton, people on both sides of the aisle. But I personally, I think the more you look into someone like that and his connections with sort of dubious oligarchs like David Rockefeller going, significantly back in time, he's sort of someone that promotes this idea of a global technocracy. I don't necessarily want to say that I'm like a Luddite and we and we should all go back to the Stone Age or things like this. But I think there needs to be like an actual public discussion on this, particularly on the fact that our out of control national security state in Silicon Valley have essentially been fusing over the past few decades, and what necessarily that means. Because a lot of people will say stuff, well, it's AI in the private sector, but when that private sector company has multi-million dollars conflicts of interest with the national security state, I think that should, be part of the discussion. Necessarily. And I think also there needs to be a way to sort of know whether some of these algorithms are hyped or whether what the company says their accuracy is, for example, is actually accurate before decisions are made to outsource major decision making, whether at the government level or the local level or really on any level, to an algorithm. So, as an example, during COVID-19, the governor of Rhode Island, Gina Raimondo, sort of gave a green light to this Israeli company called Diagnostic Robotics to use, the health data in the state to predict COVID-19 outbreaks before they could happen, right? And Gina Raimondo, by the way,
violate HIPAA laws?
Well, I'm sure a lot of those were sort of suspended under the emergency justification of COVID-19, but I'm not exactly familiar with the legal or potential legal snafus of that at the time, or maybe they justified it by saying they sort of took anonymized the data. I don't really know. But the idea was to sort of use that data to identify local hotspots and predict outbreaks before they happen. And so obviously if, the algorithm of this company predicts an outbreak, there would be sort of these localized lockdowns and people would lose their ability to engage in in-person commerce and freedom of movement, et cetera. So, consequences that are pretty significant to the people living there. And when I reported on at the time, as I recall, but it's been a few years, but I do know that the algorithm per the company was under 80% accurate. I think it was somewhere in the 70s. And so that's the company, right? So if it's not independently vetted, this is sort of, company PR at the end of the day, is that overinflated? It's quite possible, right? And so what if the accuracy of that isn't really in the 70s, it's in the 60s or near the 50s? It's no better than a coin toss. Right? Is it really worth putting that kind of power in the hand of an algorithm that isn't necessarily going to be more efficient and accurate, but all this hype that's been generated around AI as an industry suggests that has sort of created this public perception that AI is inherently smarter than human decision makers and more efficient and more cost effective, for example. I think these are kind of problematic scenarios that need to be considered. And I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer or poo-poo on on innovation, but I think, civil liberties do matter. And I think people need to be very mindful of that, especially considering, again, the Silicon Valley fusion with the national security state and the national security state's tendency to opportunistically whittle down American civil liberties for their benefit.
Webb warns that AI isn't being developed neutrally. The companies pushing AI advancements are deeply tied to the national security state, meaning decisions about its use aren't just about innovation, but also about control. The public is often told that AI will make life easier, streamline decision-making, and remove human error, but these claims are rarely questioned. Many assume AI is inherently smarter and more reliable than people, because that's how it's marketed. Webb sees this unquestioning acceptance as dangerous, especially when AI is being integrated into systems that directly affect civil liberties. AI-driven policing, predictive surveillance, and automated decision-making in government programs are becoming more common. But there's little transparency about how these systems work, who designs them, or what biases they contain. Algorithms decide who gets flagged as a security risk, which neighborhoods are over-policed, and even who gets approved for loans or medical treatments. The people impacted by these decisions often have no way to challenge them or even understand how they were made. Webb believes that people need to start questioning AI before it becomes too powerful. The choices being made today about AI's influence in society will determine how much freedom people have in the future. And if no one pushes back, that freedom may disappear without most realizing it. Remember, if you want guidance through cryptocurrency's exciting but sometimes unpredictable world, our daily 5-minute crypto newsletter is here to help. Don't pass up the chance to stay updated and make informed choices in the crypto market. The link is in the description below. Anyway guys, I hope you all enjoyed today's video and that it gave you some value. I'll see you all in the next one, and as always, all the best.